Who has had a bad week, Dominic?
Well, this is one of those weeks where there's like a depressingly large number of possible options for this bad week segment. And I just want to start by acknowledging the absolutely horrific nightclub fire in North Macedonia that killed dozens of people. I imagine we'll come back to that and what's happening in that country as a result of that fire at some point. And I also hope we'll get back to the really sad news that the US has decided to cut funding to Radio Free Europe. As radio people here and podcast people, we've seen how important that service has been across Europe, and it'll be a tragedy if it does disappear, although we don't know yet whether it will. But this week, I've decided to give a bad few weeks really, to the political stability in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Things escalated already about a month ago when the pro-Russian Bosnian Serb president Milorad Dodik was sentenced to 1 year in prison and given a 6-year ban on holding public office for crimes related to his separatist actions, specifically for going against the actions of the country's international peace envoy. Now, it's always really tricky talking about Bosnia. It's got one of the most complicated political systems in the world, and you always need quite a lot of context to even vaguely understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to try and do my best to talk about it without keeping you all here for the next 2 hours.
Well, thank you for your service. But yeah, it is crazily complicated, right? I mean, just to talk about the very basics of Bosnian politics, this Dodik guy he's just one of several presidents, right? How many presidents do they have again in Bosnia? Can you remind us?
There are 5. So Bosnia consists of 2 entities, the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Republika Srpska. And both of these entities have their own president, and Dodik is the president of the second, of Republika Srpska.
Okay, so there's the 2 entity presidents, and then there's 3 more presidents?
Yes. Yeah, so they're the 2 entity-level presidents, but Bosnia also consists of 3 constituent ethnic groups, Bosniaks and Croats, who mostly live in the Federation, and Serbs, who mainly live in Republika Srpska. And at the state level, so above the entities, they have a 3-headed presidency with a rotating chairperson. Are you still with me?
Couldn't be clearer. Sorted. Got it. 5
Great.
Presidents.
Yeah, well, not quite sorted, because there's also the Office of the High Representative. That's the peace envoy I mentioned earlier. It's an office that's run by the international community. Currently, a guy called Christian Schmidt sits in that position. He's a former member of the German CSU. And his job is to oversee the implementation of the Dayton Peace Agreement. That was the agreement that ended the extremely bloody conflict in Bosnia in 1995.
I mean, that conflict was 30 years ago now. Just to clarify, the international community is still doing peacekeeping in Bosnia all this time later.
Yes, they are still there peacekeeping. The Office of the High Representative was always meant to be a temporary measure, and as soon as certain conditions for peace were met, the idea was that it would be dismantled. Dodik thinks those conditions have been met, and actually 4 years ago, when it was time to renew the mandate, China and Russia, members of the UN Security Council who approved the appointment of the Office of the High Representative, they said they wanted to set an end date for this office, a moment at which the international community would withdraw from Bosnia's political structure. And yeah, that's something Dodik was behind. The Western powers, however, didn't want to set an end date. They felt the conditions were not sufficiently met to justify this. And in fact, the state of peace in Bosnia is sometimes described as a negative peace, an absence of open conflict, but not a positive peace where there are conditions for stability. According to official reviews of the Dayton Agreement, the root of the conflict has not been resolved. So there was no agreement on the UN Security Council on that in the end. And China and Russia went further and decided to veto approving the appointment of this guy, Christian Schmidt, the High Representative. He took the role anyway, which is apparently allowed. The approval from the UN Security Council is tradition, but not a legal requirement. But that lack of approval is now being used to undermine his office's legitimacy, especially by President Dodik, who is an ally of Russia. He actually even gave Putin an honorary medal after the full invasion of Ukraine. So Dodik is using this lack of agreement on the UN level to weaken the constitutional order, to increase the chances of succession, and even to invite the annexation of Republika Srpska by neighboring Serbia.
Oh, wow. I mean, this sounds like we're kind of moving towards a potential breakup of the country at this point. It's pretty explosive.
Yeah.
How big is the region of the Republika Srpska? Can you tell us a little bit about this place for people who don't know much about it?
Well, it's one of two political entities, and it makes up about half of the landmass of the country. About 1 million people live there, and as I said, they're mainly Serbs. But it's even more complicated than that sounds, because this entity is actually made up of two separate big chunks of land. So it's not just one territory. And actually, if it were to be annexed or to merge with Serbia or to become independent, there would be two bits of the other entity, the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which would get trapped between Republika Srpska and Croatia. So yeah, it's incredibly complicated.
Oh, geez. Yeah, and really precarious for the country as a whole and the wider Balkan region, I guess. So if I understand correctly, Dodik is not abiding by the terms of the post-war peace agreement, the Dayton Agreement.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Dodik has never enthusiastically played along with the international peacekeeping efforts. But the latest problems, they stem back to 2023 when the National Assembly of Republika Srpska passed a law to suspend rulings by the Constitutional Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also to stop publishing laws and decrees from the Office of the High Representative. This was in turn cancelled by the Office of the High Representative. And now, last week, Dodik, inspired by, I think, the example of Trump ruling by decree with his black Sharpie, Dodik has gone on his own decree signing spree, including one stating that Bosnia's state-level security and judicial services are no longer legitimate in Republika Srpska, which is quite a big escalation and quite a deliberate escalation of things. There are signs that the international community are waking up to the urgency of the situation. Mark Rutte, the new head of NATO, did make an urgent trip to Sarajevo last week and met with the three state presidents, stating unwavering support for Bosnia's territorial integrity. And the EU also beefed up their peacekeeping force in the country last week, sending hundreds of extra troops from Czechia, Italy, and Romania to help keep the peace.
So Dodik himself, he was convicted about a month ago, right?
Yes.
But he's not in jail.
But he's not in jail. No, that verdict against Dodik is not final, so he can appeal it. But last week, actually, to make things even more complicated, a new arrest warrant was issued against him and also the Prime Minister of the Republika Srpska Assembly and the Speaker of that Assembly. The question now is whether or not these three will actually be arrested and whether the EU peacekeeping forces would assist. Interestingly, the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, they welcome the extra EU troops, but explicitly requested that no more Hungarian troops would be sent. And this is where Viktor Orban pops up his head, as he does often in a story like this. Orban supports Dodik and is accused by Bosnia's defense minister of consistently helping Dodik to undermine the constitutional order of Bosnia. So yeah, you can understand why there is suspicion around Hungarian troops in Bosnia. And this whole situation is made even more unpredictable because of the political crisis in neighboring Serbia, where President Aleksandar Vučić and his government are still under huge pressure from this extraordinary protest movement started by students and widely supported that has been going on for many months now. I won't go into too much detail about that now, but it reached a kind of climax last Saturday when over 300,000 Serbians peacefully protested. Some fear that Vučić has an incentive to help fan the flames of the tensions in Bosnia in order to distract from his own domestic issues. So there's a lot going on, and it's all very much in flux. Like, nothing feels static at the moment. And yeah, my husband actually just got back from a week in the capital city of Bosnia, in Sarajevo.
Oh, yeah, one of my favorite cities in Europe. I was wondering why you actually know so much suddenly about Bosnia.
Yeah. Thank you to Thomas for talking to me for many, many hours about this.
What's the atmosphere in Sarajevo like right now, did he say?
Yeah, he said lots of people were very nervous. He just happened to be there right now interviewing loads of people for a theatre piece he's making. So he did speak to a lot of people and about this specifically. And the people he spoke to said that they hadn't been so anxious since the signing of the Dayton Agreement in 95. And yeah, this feels like one of those news stories that's getting a bit buried due to our fixation on the United States and on Ukraine. And of course, this latest turmoil is also in a way connected to the dramatic shifts in foreign policy from the White House. And yeah, Dodik is seizing on this moment to see how far he can go without being stopped by Trump. And actually, the good news is Dodik will probably be a bit disappointed that Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, he came out and backed the Bosnian institutions and not Dodik's secessionist dreams in a recent statement. Though, as we know, we can't trust the US administration to necessarily stick to any one foreign policy for more than 5 minutes. So, yeah, this is a moment where people are calling for the EU to be proactive and decisive. And some are already showing that there are signs of optimism on that front, in that they sent these extra troops. And it does at least seem like there's a beginning of a response. It's also worth noting, if we're looking more at the optimistic side of things, that at least from what my husband heard speaking to some historians in Bosnia, Dodik isn't all powerful, even amongst Serbs. There are Serbs who ignore some of his decrees, for example. So yeah, it's definitely a bad week for political stability in Bosnia, but let's hope it doesn't have to continue getting worse and that things can get better. I'll end this now, but I read an interesting opinion piece in Politico from Arminka Helic, a Bosnian foreign policy expert and member of the UK's House of Lords. It's about how this is actually an opportunity for the EU to redefine itself through a strategy of deterrence, strength, and principled engagement. It's quite an interesting read. I'll put a link to it in the show notes.